trade winds shift, they don't die. And so be prepared for that, whether it's your sourcing, it's your expansion strategies, because the world is extremely connected and we will be connected. That's not going away. It's just, you do want the ability to shift as and when these implications happen.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Retail Remix. I'm Nicole Silberstein, the editor-in-chief of Retail Touchpoints. Tariffs may very well go down as the most used word of 2025, and it's clearly a topic that can't be avoided. So we decided to bring in an expert to help us make sense of it all in today's episode, brought to you by Big Commerce. Rathna Sharad has 30 years of experience in global supply chain, international trade logistics, and e-commerce at companies like Microsoft and UPS. Now she's the CEO and founder of the cross-border shipping logistics platform FlavorCloud and spends her days helping brands of all sizes go global. I think you'll agree she's the perfect person to help us get a handle on everything happening today in international trade. So let's get to it. Welcome to Retail Remix. I'm excited to have global e-commerce and trade expert Rathna Sharad here with me today. Rathna, thanks for being here.
Hi, Nicole. Very excited to be here.
So I've already given the listeners a little bit of a rundown of your background, but I'm really always a sucker for a founder story. So if you wouldn't mind indulging me and our listeners a little bit and telling us a little bit about yourself and how FlavorCloud came to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I love founder stories too, and mine is definitely not a traditional or linear path. So I'm an engineer turned product leader, been leading product organizations for the last 3 decades. The first decade was in supply chain logistics. So I kind of just landed in logistics in 97 and I kind of fell in love with it. And started as a developer and then managing technology solutions, specifically around cross-border enablement around the world. So North America, Asia, and Europe. So built route optimization solutions across all modes of transportation, air, ocean, and trucking. I also got to work with customs and global trade compliance organizations around the world, including the US CBP, Customs and Border Protection. So defining technology contracts and what that should look like. In those days, it was primarily B2B. B2C was still very nascent. So that was the first decade. And then I moved to a completely different space, moved to Seattle from Portland and started in a tiny team at Microsoft. We were a dozen, the founding team that built the ad platform that eventually became Bing Ads and about 3 billion when I left. So enormous scale in a short amount of time, and really my foray into B2C, because we were helping make the connection between brand and consumer through ads. And I found that incredibly fascinating. I owned the marketplace, monetization, platform aspects on the product side, and got to work with the Amazons and eBays of the world all the way down to SMBs. But at the same time, I traveled a lot for work and personally, and the way I discover, new countries through brands. And so when I came back, I would shop, and my own personal consumer experience buying from these international brands was so horrendous that it got me thinking about why my past life didn't translate to a great B2C consumer future that we were powering at Microsoft. I felt best suited to solve this problem. These are very disparate worlds, the world of logistics with tech and e-commerce, really bringing all of the three together. So quit along with my co-founder, Shogun Soft, who used to be my developer at Bing Ads. We started our first company. It was a marketplace that enabled small and medium brands sell internationally. We scaled to over 300 brands in 100 countries, selling to 200. And we found two things. It wasn't just an SMB problem. And we started getting requests from larger brands that didn't belong in the marketplace, but wanted to leverage our tech and capability to scale internationally. But the second thing we found is that, none of the solutions actually worked. So we had to build our back-end technology platform ground up. And that was the genesis of FlavorCloud. So we saw this massive need. And during that time, really what I thought that connected commerce was going to be big, it became a reality. So we took a lot of the learnings, data insight, created a brand new services API first model, essentially, that any brand anywhere in the world could plug in and offer a seamless international shipping experience. So that was the genesis of FlavorCloud in 2018. And we're a little over 7 years old, and we solve cross-border logistics for brands worldwide.
I think we can easily say it's an interesting, to be nice, time to be in international commerce. Before we really dig into some of the current challenges that have cropped up this year, what I really want to do is get an understanding of the baseline challenges that brands of all sizes face when they're trying to take their business international outside of geopolitical disruption. So I imagine logistics is obviously very complicated at any point in time, but I'm sure that's just a part of it. So what are some of those like core challenges that all businesses face as they start to look to go cross-border?
Yeah, it's a great starting point, I think, because pre-tariff, pre all of this, which has become top of mind now, really, we're living in a connected world. Social commerce has really made it such that consumers are finding brands on Instagram and TikTok, and all of these various platforms have made it really easy to have that brand and consumer connection. And as a result, they don't even know where the brand is from. Consumers just want the product now. They want a great experience. They want it cheaper, faster. It's always the same expectations as domestic, if you will. So regardless of whether it's a beauty product from South Korea or an Italian shoe, you want it now. But what does it take to make that happen, have a domestic-like experience? It is incredibly complex. And, about 15 years ago, it used to be, or even 10, it used to be the biggest barriers to cross-border where payment, currency, localization, really how do I solve all of those problems? They are no longer the core problems because a lot of platforms like Shopify and really great solutions in terms of payment and currency and localization have made it really the internet a great place to shop, right? And have a great experience. But fundamentally, what makes cross-border hard is three core areas. It's shipping, customs, and compliance. And why is it so complex? It's because there's 220 plus countries around the world. Every single country has its own regulations. They all have compliance that is very different depending on the commodity that you move. So depending on the product, depending on the country, there's a lot of complexity there. So not only are you having to deal with the logistics of, figuring out which carrier is great, who should I use, how do I get great rates? Because, I'm not shipping as much volume as I do domestically. I need to grow this business to Asia, countries in APAC, or maybe Europe, or, start with Canada. All of those have very different challenges because no single carrier is great at all of this. So shipping is a very enormous challenge in itself. But then add on customs. How do you clear export and import customs regulatory requirements? And third is compliance. Can I ship this product here? What are nuances of rules and regulations that I need to be aware of? And most importantly, all this translates into friction for the end consumer. Friction because what she's expecting to see is one single price in the checkout, just like domestic. It's free shipping or really low cost shipping. I see clear returns, capabilities, and go. But all of those are incredibly hard to do with cross-border because you have to understand all of these implications and provide an experience that allows for, don't show up with, the carrier shows up and says you need to pay, $50 more in terms of duties or taxes, or that your parcel is stuck in customs and you get a call from customs saying that I need all these additional documentation before you'll get it. Or it's 3 weeks later and you still have no tracking information. What happened to your parcel? So all of these are really important challenges and friction points that make it very hard for brands to scale.
And I imagine more important than ever because consumers are more demanding than ever. Amazon has set a bar and consumers pretty much expect everybody to try to keep it. And when it's done well, it's completely invisible to your point. Consumers have no idea how much effort has to go in behind the scenes to make it happen. But when it doesn't go well, they're going to make some noise.
Yeah.
So now, are your clients primarily US based, the companies that you are working with? So you are primarily helping US companies sell into other countries around the world. Is that right?
So we started primarily with the US. So we are actually an anywhere to anywhere logistics platform.
Okay.
So we support customers from around the world. It really doesn't matter where you're located. The complexity of international is that this is one of those businesses where, unlike a traditional model where you would start in one country, figure out how to do that really well, and then think about expansion, we needed to be great at 220 plus countries day one, because regardless of where you originate a shipment, in this case, let's say the US, obviously we started with the Shopify, and so we tend to be very US outbound heavy. Although that's changing because all these other markets are growing faster now. But ultimately, importing into every country around the world, we needed to have those capabilities and customs network in place and carrier network in place to do those things from day one. So we're very much a global platform.
So you are also then very much right in the center of all of this trade turmoil right now.
Yes,
From
absolutely.
that vantage point, I'm curious first just to hear what you've been hearing from companies, like how you might characterize the general sentiment on the ground at the moment.
Yeah, it is an incredibly difficult time right now. Certainly, there's a lot of noise. Overall, I think the sentiment that we hear is that they are looking for subject matter expertise on to make sense of, what is this? What are the implications of the changes? The volatility does not help, right? I talked about being in the global trade environment for the last 3 decades, and really we haven't seen anything of this magnitude happen. And usually it's not that trade and tariffs don't change, they change all the time. It's a very fluid landscape. In fact, the US is one that has remained almost entirely insulated from this change, but it has happened before in other countries like Brexit. We saw a lot of changes in the UK. EU implemented their iOS changes 3 to 4 years ago, and they're still being rolling out various changes. And so this is not new. As global commerce has evolved and cross-border commerce has grown, every country wants a piece of the tax revenue. They're all thinking about, how do you protect borders? How do you understand what's really coming into the country? How does that actually affect domestic brands? So these are all questions that every government is asking, and they also want a piece of the tax revenue. So this is very much a kind of activity that you would expect. What is different about the way it was done is the magnitude of change and how quickly it was implemented. And also there was a lot of back and forth. There was no real understanding of the implications and advance notice as you would normally see in these types of scenarios. So every brand that was actually at one point, it impacted all brands because there was tariff changes for everyone. And then it turned out that Canada origin, Mexico origin, China origin were the most impacted, if you will. And China, especially, enormous implications. And so depending on the brand and where you were manufacturing, you saw a lot of implications to your business. Your pricing needed to change, and it needs to change for your domestic wholesale business. This is not just about implications to your cross-border and international sales, but also just, what is your pricing for domestic? How do you think about implications to that? So because of that, there's a lot of things to consider for brands. Really understand to them what is the cost benefit of this, and do a deeper analysis and kind of come up with a pricing structure. The other thing they're having to deal with is not knowing what has changed and when did it go live and when did it get implemented. And there's a lot of folks that suddenly claim to be experts in this, and so you're getting advice on the internet, and then that's not necessarily the right place to get advice. So really making sense of it has been really hard for brands.
Yeah. So kind of like medical advice, like don't look for answers in Google searches right now.
Yes. Yes.
And beyond these analytical insights that you're getting from your clients, you also did just release some research on the state of cross-border commerce. And I believe it covered all of last year plus Q1 of this year, right?
Yes. So we did the first of a three-part series of a cross-border report, and this one was more focused on consumer insight.
Okay. So tell us a little bit then about the study and some of the biggest insights that you were able to glean then from that data.
Yeah. So first of all, we have data on, this is a year-over-year cohort growth, if you will, that we looked at. We looked at consumer behaviors. There were over 80 data points across the FlavorCloud network. So some of the really interesting insights from this was number one, that rest of the world is a very important focus area for brands that focused on not just the core countries that they typically focus on, which is Canada, Australia, and the UK tend to be the ones that most folks really start with. But those that had a data-driven strategy and really thought about rest of the world saw greater success. And this is also in part because rest of the world is actually growing faster than these more established markets, if you will. So APAC and Middle East specifically were regions where we saw the most growth. And that is a really interesting insight because the world is super connected and you have access to the rest of the world now. And that's a super interesting insight. The second thing we saw was that cross-border verticals have really evolved to all consumer verticals. It used to be that 10 years ago, even when we were doing the marketplace, it was very focused on fashion, beauty, accessories, electronics. Those were really the mainstay of cross-border. But today, it literally is every category. And the fastest growing categories are surprisingly health and wellness. That seems to be a very big focus. It saw some of the well over 100% growth. And in Q1, it saw almost 200% growth. So really significant growth in that category. Also, home goods is one of those other categories that came out winner. And so really what that is telling us is that it is not limited to certain types of verticals. It really is all consumer verticals that are starting to see this overall expansion, if you will. The third data point here that I wanted to talk about was a high repeat customer purchase. And this is a very encouraging stat in the sense that we talked a lot about the friction in terms of consumer, the type of friction that they usually come across with cross-border because of the complexity. But we also noticed that if you eliminate that friction through DDP, which is a delivery duties paid model, which basically means that, what you see in the checkout is all you will pay. It's a fully guaranteed model where the consumer sees all of the shipping costs and it's a great low cost option or a free shipping option. And then also sees all of the duties, taxes, and fees are included either in the product price or in a line item that you see. And therefore, you're not going to get charged after the fact. You're also going to have a great experience in terms of transit all the way through. It's not getting stuck in customs. It's not, you have tracking information just like you do with domestic. And once you did that and you resolved these friction points, they actually have some of the highest repeat customer purchases. And that is very significant for brands, obviously, because, once you CAC can be very significant. So once you acquire a customer, you want to retain that customer and have them come back and shopping more. And so that is extremely encouraging to see.
Yeah, definitely. When you talk about the categories that are really taking off, is that globally import export between countries, or are we talking specifically popular categories coming out of the US into global markets?
So this tends to be coming out of the US, primarily going into all of these other markets, because our mainstay is still US outbound, but going into 220 countries. So across the region, and you'll actually see some of the insights by region and country in the report. And what we see is that across the board, health and wellness is doing really well, especially for US outbound.
Well, there's no doubt that global trade has seen a lot of upheaval this year, but next we're going to dig into more areas of opportunity that are still out there, right after a quick message from our sponsor.
Retailers know how frustrating it is to use a rigid e-commerce platform with tons of restrictions and hidden fees. But what if you could customize and curate your online store exactly how you wanted? Meet BigCommerce, the flexible e-commerce platform that works for you, not against you. where you can easily integrate with any best-in-class tools with no additional fees. That means more money in your pocket. Whether you're selling B2C or B2B, BigCommerce delivers powerful e-commerce solutions for every business need. Want to learn more? Visit bigcommerce.com/retailremix.
As far as areas of international opportunity for U.S. companies go, I mean, you touched a little bit on some of these more mature markets, and Canada certainly now, with everything that's happened this year, doesn't seem as open to U.S. goods as it had been previously. But I noticed in the report that there are some countries where shipments from the U.S. had increased quite markedly last year. So where are you seeing the biggest opportunities right now for U.S. merchants and brands to expand internationally? And do you have any insight into kind of what's driving the demand in those regions?
I think in general, so cross-border today is 31%. So it's a very significant percent, and this is the average. We do see certain verticals like health and wellness where it's well beyond 50% tends to be international. And so that is an enormous growth opportunity for brands, especially if it doesn't require a lot of lift. You're able to work with a tech stack that allows for simply expanding to all these countries, taking a data-driven approach. One of the things I always say when I talk to customers is look at your website traffic, and think about how you can monetize that better. You're already through social media being one of the biggest drivers, seeing a lot of traffic to the website that's non-US in this case. And how do you take advantage of that? How do you increase conversions? So taking a very data-driven approach, turning on all of these markets, having great customizations, localizations by market, which you can do through tools, and allow for the data to tell you who are the biggest countries, where are you converting the best, and then kind of think about optimization strategies. So there's different things you could do, like pricing strategies within that country that make conversions be better, or think about bundling may have a better, conversion. You could also do free shipping strategies. There's many different conversion strategies that are specific to markets, and we work with brands typically on those strategies and how do you really scale up a particular market. So 5 to 10 countries are going to emerge as your biggest ROI countries, and that can also inform your marketing strategies. So if you are going to spend dollars on customer acquisition, kind of, how can you make that really be successful and keep CAC within bounds? So that is kind of one of the biggest opportunities that we see. The second is DDP. So really delivery duties paid means with all the challenges that you have, and it's not just tariffs, although accurately calculating the tariffs and making sure that is being captured in the checkout so the consumer pays for the tariffs is important, because otherwise it impacts your bottom line. Somebody needs to pay for that tariff and it will impact margin for these brands. So really, as and when it goes live, obviously it's really hard to manage if you don't have an automated technology solution that deeply understands, what the implications are for your specific business, your specific SKUs, because not every SKU is impacted by the tariffs either. So it's not a one size fits all. It really needs to be accurate and customized to your business. But once you do that, having a delivery duties paid model means you remove all of the friction. And so you take away the margin and implications for you as a brand too. So it really becomes that true growth opportunity to go test these new markets and stay profitable with these transactions. And then the third implication to think about is obviously depending on your sourcing. This is where we see if you were sourcing in China, you have big implications in to domestic business as well. So really thinking about on the sourcing side, again, what are the tariff implications? How do you think about understanding which SKUs are impacted, looking at mitigations? There are many different strategies for tariff mitigation. Like you could employ a much more agile wholesale fulfillment option so that you're not paying for duties ahead of time, not knowing it's called duty deferral. You're bringing more smaller drops of inventory, so it's not a large amount of inventory with high tariffs, especially when you don't know what's happening or what's going to happen. It just makes sense to manage that differently. Alongside tariff engineering, looking at alternate pricing strategies, because the tariff will tell you how you want to price your products as well. Maybe working with the sourcing partner on mitigating some of that, or even alternate sourcing locations. Now, that takes a little longer to do and it's not a quick knee-jerk reaction, but it just needs to be long-term planning.
There has been so much focus on the tariff situation, probably because it's changing almost every day, so it's always in the headlines. I do think that the changes to the de minimis rules kind of have been pushed to the side by all of this tariff kerfuffle. And those also could potentially have a huge impact on brands. So I'm wondering if you could just give us a quick rundown of what's happening on that side of the equation and what implications it might have for U.S. companies.
That's a great question because it is bundled with tariffs, but it's actually a different aspect of it. Now, the de minimis, it's also known often as the 321, Section 321. But essentially what that means is the U.S. had one of the highest de minimis, or still does, the $800 de minimis. And this is particularly an implication for D2C. So this is e-commerce impact as opposed to B2B, which tends to be a lot higher in order values. So for shipments that are coming into the country that are under $800, they could clear with a informal clearance model. And that meant that essentially it's duty free. You don't have taxes. You don't have any kind of implications. So as US consumers, we are actually very used to that. We are not used to paying duties, taxes, and other aspects to the product unless your order is over that $800 limit. And that used to be the case for all countries, regardless of which country you're ordering from, for example, where it was manufactured. Now, that de minimis went away for China and Hong Kong origin goods. Now it used to be the 135%. Now that has come down in terms of tariff to a 30%. But that's 30% plus any commodity level assessment. So depending on the commodity, you would have tariffs and duties that apply as well. So all of that is now applied to orders under the $800 that are arriving in the United States and no longer have that low value clearance mechanism. So that's the first change that has happened. So that obviously impacts a large number of businesses were built on this model. The Shein and Temu, the ones that are most often referred to. It really is very many of these companies that were manufacturing in China and Hong Kong specifically are impacted. Now, this de minimis is actually something that was even before the current administration, this was being considered, it's ultimately tax revenue that the government is missing out on in terms of not assessing duties and taxes. And it's really high de minimis when compared to other countries like, say, Canada, which has a $40 duty de minimis. And so, you look at all the other countries around the world, UK has 135 GBP. So US is one of the highest. So that needed to change at some point, and that's what we're seeing also happen as part of the tariffs. And this was coming anyways, I think. It is just the implementation that's a little out of whack. And then you have the rest of the world is going to follow. Now, we don't know the timing of it, but we expect that is coming as well. So right now it's in place for China and Hong Kong origin. The other thing that this has done is also eliminated a different loophole that a lot of companies were taking advantage of. And that was they would bring it through Canada or Mexico and avoid the tariffs for transitory shipments into the US. And use the US infrastructure to then ship out of the US. Now, that loophole has also gone away. So you couldn't just bring it into Mexico or Canada and then bring it across using this loophole into the US. So in all, there's a lot of different implications because the de minimis has gone away. And it has also resulted in more scrutiny, which is the third thing that is important to know. Because one of the reasons that governments governments are making these changes and getting, I call it, the borders are becoming less porous, and this is happening around the world, we want to know what is being brought into the country. You truly want to understand, think of it like you are coming back from somewhere, traveling and coming back into the country. You are declaring what you're bringing. And essentially, you need to say what is in this product and providing accurate descriptions. Where was it manufactured is a very important criteria there, so that you're not bringing something illegal, whether it's fentanyl or other types of issues that the government is trying to mitigate. It's deeply understanding what is crossing the border and what are these commodities, and doing it in a scalable way. And so a lot of these mechanisms that are being put in place right now is also how you declare. So e-commerce merchants need to now have what's called a harmonized commodity code that fully describes up to the 10 digit, describes what this, so it's a women's cotton dress that's 80% cotton, is an important aspect of, they need to know exactly what it is so that the tariffs can be assessed. And so the mechanism has also changed.
So much more nuanced than I even realized. So thank you for walking us through all of that. Based on your previous answers, I may already know what you're going to say to this, but everything feels so kind of disconcerting right now, confusing. There's so many different aspects. Depending on what your business is, they impact everybody in different ways. Would you say that this is a moment to perhaps pull back on international commerce and just focus domestically? I mean, would that be the simpler option, or is it exactly the opposite?
I think it's actually exactly the opposite. And the reason for that is it's no longer about just should you focus on international. And I want to talk about the two implications. It is your domestic business implication, which is very much tied to where you're sourcing from. And that part is still cross-border. And then you've got your international expansion aspect of your business. And both of these are pretty critical for long-term success, because the fastest growing is cross-border. And I'll draw a parallel to what happened during COVID or post-COVID. Brands then, when they struggled with the challenges of COVID, really thought of international as the best expansion strategy. So anytime there is domestic softness, recession, we saw that happen again. International became the number one strategy for growth, because it doesn't take a lot to expand once you have the right infrastructure and tools in place. But what is really different about the tariff volatility today is that it deeply impacts your domestic business as well. So having a strategy that is more holistic, that is about a supply chain strategy, and that is the distinguishing factor, I think, for brands. It's less about making knee-jerk reactions for the short term, not knowing which way this is going to go. I think it's a moment to actually step back and say, how do I think about future-proofing the business? Think about supply chain resilience for the long term, right? It's not a question of will the next tariff impact or another type of global event trigger an issue. It's just a matter of when. We're just seeing different things happen, and you just need to have resilient supply chains that can weather the storm, if you will. And those that actually not just come out stronger, but really thrive are going to be ones that invest in the longer term, so that no matter what this next, change is, that you're prepared, that you're able to redirect, if you will, and have the right supply chain in place.
It's so counterintuitive, because often when a business is under pressure, the immediate impulse is to pull back, cut back on spending, cut back on marketing, cut back on expansion. And you are not the first executive that I've spoken to that said, take a breath, look at the big picture here, look at the long term, and you'll realize that's actually not the right thing to do. Before I let you go, I'm just wondering if you have any other final advice for brands navigating this tumult, how to distinguish even just between what really matters and what's just noise out there right now.
Yeah, it's, there is a lot of noise. And I think one of the critical things is thinking about the long-term aspects of your business and thinking about how you build agility and resilience into that business, specifically on, ask questions around your entire supply chain and sourcing it. warehousing, it's, how you deliver e-commerce deliveries to your consumers worldwide, really all of these aspects. So focus on the right partner, and that can also, and the building blocks of the technology enablement that will get you there. That's the right overarching strategy. And the second is deeply understanding the unit economics, because this is a good exercise at all times. But right now, especially with the tariffs, it's take a deep breath and really kind of work with a partner and figure out what the implications are to your specific SKUs, and then make changes accordingly in terms of think long term and how do you think about diversifying again. One of the things that we see also happening is regional supply chain optimization. So really decentralization. That is key for many different reasons. Tariff volatility is one of those things. Alternate sourcing locations, because we don't know when the next trade winds shift, they don't die. And so be prepared for that, whether it's your sourcing, it's your expansion strategies, because the world is extremely connected and we will be connected. That's not going away. It's just, you do want the ability to shift as and when these implications happen.
Well, thank you, Rathna, so much for being here today and really helping us try to make sense of what is a very complicated situation right now in global trade.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
And thank you also to our sponsor, BigCommerce. As always, we would love to continue this conversation with all of you on LinkedIn on the Retail Touchpoints page. Be sure to stop by and drop your take on the topics we covered with Rathna today in the comments section, and let us know what topics you'd like to hear about in future episodes. Thanks, everyone. Talk to you soon. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Retail Remix. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a future episode. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or your favorite podcast app. Until next time, keep mixing it up.